Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Dirty Habits with Brother Chris, Brother Justin. And we're going to talk about today demons. We talk about that a lot, but there's a lot to cover, different things, different aspects. So that's really going to be our topic tonight. And we're glad you're here tuning in and listening.
So, guys, how do demons interact with us?
Well, by far the most common activity would be what we call temptation. Every human being, Catholic or non-Catholic, Christian, atheist, Buddhist, no matter who they are, the demons, that's how they work. And they try to work to incite either our own inner desires to do bad things, evil things, or they try to get us to sort of follow the mores of our fallen world, either way, just to bring us to some kind of allegiance to evil, I guess, or acceptance of evil.
Well, real quick though, just because one feels temptation does not necessarily mean that they're being oppressed by a demonic entity.
No.
So
that's correct. We're just talking about demons today.
Yeah.
And so while we're going to discuss some of the more extraordinary stuff, we are only talking about demons. By far, I would say most of us, like Brother Justin said, the reality for most of us is on a daily, moment-to-moment basis. It's going to be our own selfishness.
Yeah, our own dirty habits, if you will.
Right. It'll be the flesh that deals. But we're talking about this. But even within demons, we have to recognize that temptation is still the general way they're going to do it. These other ways are really extraordinary. And yes, they are happening, and they seem to be happening more and more as we see different Catholic exorcists. But in the main sense, these things are still, by far and away, this is the way they generally interact if it's them that are the cause of any of our issues. I've noticed that some of the more modern Catholic exorcists, modern day ones, a lot of them will refer to a book by Father Louis Camelli. The book, I believe, is called The Devil You Don't Know. And in that book, he talks about temptation, and he breaks it down into kind of 4 types, which are easy to remember because they all start with the letter D. And because the exorcist used it, I figured this would be a good one. And then if we want, we can get a little more deeper into each of these. But the 4 ways in which he says temptation comes about when it's from the devil is, number 1, primarily deception. Right? The devil is a liar. They seek to divert our view of reality. They want to offer us empty and false promises that will draw us more deeply into evils and complicated schemes and such. They always want to deviate us from the truth, whether they can do that only a little bit or in a major way. And it's important to realize that no matter what they promise, rarely is it the fact that actually pans out for anyone.
Right.
And if so, even that's going to probably be to your detriment.
Yeah, and it's not right. It wouldn't necessarily be that the devil's going to spout off a whole bunch of false premises to you.
Right.
I think a lot of times, if you look at the case of the garden, what the devil will do is he'll give you sort of true-ish things, but lead you to draw the wrong conclusion.
Right.
From those things. Like when Satan says to Eve, did God say that you would die? You're not really going to die.
Right.
And it's because the Lord was talking about a different kind of death than what was presumed, you know?
Right.
So
exactly.
Anyway.
So, but deception is the primary one. I mean, that's even the one that Jesus calls us out on, that he's a liar from the beginning, and a murderer. The murderer going back to the idea of the garden that Justin mentioned, because of that fall, human beings entered into moral or spiritual and physical death. So in that sense, he's also the murderer. Number 2, division. Whether he's deceived us already or not, he seeks to manipulate to divide us away from God, to divide us away from our community, our family, our friends, our society, and even to divide us within our true selves. And in that way, he brings disunity and chaos more and more into our lives, which makes us only more liable to manipulation or things like that. From that, the third D is diversion. And you could also call it distraction. And I think this is especially a big one in our modern Western culture for everybody, but especially for people of a certain age or younger, because of the whole social media aspect. And people literally become so tied in, so connected to their phones and all their techie stuff that it becomes difficult. But the devil uses those kind of things to have us so absorbed in things that in the end aren't all that important, that we just literally lose ourselves in it. And it's not so much people are malicious or evil, in as much as they just don't have time to do anything spiritual in the end, and they end up just kind of wasting away spiritually, from the important things in life to focus all their time, energy, and effort on superficial stuff.
Like the really horrible low things in life become the addiction. That's what you really want to spend all of your time doing.
Right. And I mean, I admit it, even myself to an extent, I can spend an hour or two lost just looking at the stupidest, most irrelevant things on the internet or something. And, it's something we all struggle with.
Yeah, my gateway in is, who is in that movie again? And then once you go into IMDb, it's like, suddenly you're on Wikipedia looking up weird things about Bigfoot and stuff.
And then you're like 4 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon, or whatever that thing is, when it's 7 degrees or 7.
Well, have you seen The Social Dilemma, the documentary?
Yes. Oh. Yeah. Those movies are actually terrifying.
It's horrifying. My wife and I are never giving our kids smartphones. It's just not happening. You guys can send a pigeon to come get us if there's an emergency or something. Yeah, you don't need a smartphone.
No. So the fourth D is discouragement. Right, the devil loves to get us sad, to get us feeling depressed, overwhelmed, tired, fatigued, disappointed, because that helps to stop us from advancing in our faith. By regressing, we become lazy because we just give up. We become intimidated by our circumstances, and we just become discouraged until we're completely paralyzed from affecting really any change. And again, this is something we all struggle with, because part of the irony, right, of our lives is we have the most leisurely life any human people have ever been able to possess, and we seem more busy than any other time in history, and we just get into these weird things. And I will just bring up this, we can talk about this more deeply some other time, but we have to recognize the difference between feeling convicted and feeling condemned. God convicts us. So you might feel a sadness, or it's really a contrition, because God is touching your conscience, and you're realizing and reflecting on something that you've done or are currently doing that's not right. And so the feeling, though, is to get you to repent, to change. So it's positive. Even though it's a painful feeling, it's done for us to grow. The devil doesn't work that way. Neither do we ourselves often, if we're living in the, quote, flesh, that is from our own selfishness. We condemn ourselves. So if the voice in your head is saying something like, you're stupid, you always do this, that's never God. That's either your own baggage within, or that's the devil putting that on you, or the world telling you that. God never condemns us. He convicts us in order to save us. Condemnation just sort of brings us further down the road and towards despair and such. So those are really that's all temptation, Quinn. And so those would be like the 4 main ways: deception, division, diversion, and discouragement. And I would say that would account for, I'm just making up a number, but I would say 80 to 90% of what the devil's activity in the average person's life would ever consist of.
And for most people, they probably experience that as like a ladder, right?
Yeah.
Like it starts with deception, and then it goes kind of down the list into finally feeling super discouraged. And that's kind of where the devil wants you to be, discouraged. You don't want to try anymore.
I mean, you can see it too, right? I mean, like you said, addictions from these diversions and the addictions, and you can't overcome them, and you get to the point, I mean, it could even reach suicide or suicide ideation or something. It's horrible. So,
well, then it makes you depressed, and then you're harder on yourself, and then it becomes a cycle, right?
Right.
So, with that being said, what are there degrees of how the devil interacts with you, or the demonic activities?
Yeah, there are degrees of the devil's interacting with us, and temptation, like I said, would be the most basic, primary way in which that occurs. However, going into the more extraordinary forms, which are more exciting to talk about, but honestly are make up a very small percentage of what's happening. But over the centuries, already starting back with Judaism, over time, there's been an increasing understanding in the church and the collection of experience and data and looking at revelation that by modern times, modern Catholic exorcists have come to a pretty general consensus regarding the degrees of this extraordinary type of activity. I'm going to use, and we're going to talk about one of the most famous exorcists in modern times who passed away just several years ago, Father Gabriel Amorth, who was the chief exorcist in Rome, and in fact is the teacher of many of the modern ones, or at least a reference to a lot of these men. And he, together with other Catholic exorcists, Father Lampert, Father Ripperger, Father Gary Thomas, who the movie The Rite and the book The Rite were about, Father Fortea, all of them, as well as experts who deal in this area with the Catholic Church, Bly, M. Scott Peck, who's now deceased, and Gallagher, who are psychiatrists and psychologists.
Scott Peck is the guy who wrote The Road.
That's right, The Road Less Traveled. He was also the attending psychiatrist in 3 exorcisms, which he dialogues in a book called. I'll have to get back to the book's title. Maybe we can put it in some. But he didn't want that book published till after he was dead because he didn't want to have to deal with the repercussions. I think it's Glimpses of the Devil is the name of the book. But anyways, both modern exorcists and others, they all kind of use his degrees. Now, Amorth really breaks it down into 7 degrees. So he has a very precise thing. When we look at some of the others, basically what they do is they might only have 3 or 4 because they combine some of his. So you're going to find the same general idea if you look this up in other areas. So what's from least to greatest? What's the least? This one they would all agree on. The technical term in English is infestation, and that's the haunted house. Right? That's when you have footsteps, you hear voices, you see apparitions, furniture, other objects move or disappear, odors with no discernible source. Infestation never affect human beings. They affect property, houses, places, objects, especially cursed objects and satanic things, and animals. So that would be the least because they don't affect human persons directly, but indirectly. The next 4 degrees would be more direct experience upon a human being. Number 2 is harassment, and Father Amorth defines that as a series of small external irritations and annoyances caused by them directly to act on them from without. So it might be the most small things. The car will break down at this exact place and that'll coincide with you getting a cold, it's very minor, but it's just the very beginnings of sort of the demons sort of breaking in. Now, the next one, which all of the exorcists would agree on, is called oppression. That actually is physical attacks of some sort, slaps, scratches you hear about, sleep disturbances, regular nightmares, frequent severe illnesses, major depression or anxiety that come out of nowhere and have no chemical connection when tested, severe financial or employment problems that suddenly correspond to maybe growth in religion. While all these things can happen in normal situations, have nothing to do whatsoever with the devil, the fact that all of them happen at once or in such rapid succession could be a sign of something greater than just your normal bad luck or circumstances. Number 4, vexation. That goes when the people is literally assaulted physically from without. I think we have examples of the saints. Maybe you can think of one. I know the Cure d'Ars, St. John Vianney, was literally thrown out of his bed regularly, like against the wall.
Whoa, really?
You have we
John
talked
Vianney
about
was?
one. Yeah.
Whoa.
He's the one that would wake up and then once he realized it was the devil, he's just like,
Oh, it's you again. Yeah, I can't remember who that was. But there have been many saints who have done this. More modern times, I think there's been stories of that.
Wow, John Vianney was thrown out of bed?
Yeah, his are really... There's a book called Saints Who Battled Satan. And I think Paul
Whoa.
Thigpen writes it, but the book's called Saints Who Battled Satan. And that, all it is chapters of the stories of different saints who were assaulted. Padre Pio struggled too, but he didn't have, I don't think, to that extent. But vexation is an actual, like, where it's more than just a little scratch or like a slap feeling, like you're literally assaulted.
So these things aren't people who are opening the doors to the occult. This is like...
Well, how they receive them, yeah, you'd have to look at one of our videos where we talked about how you open doorways. Yeah, the average Christian couldn't be affected like this, generally speaking, or wouldn't be. Yeah. But you'll notice there. So what we're seeing is it starts with outside objects, infestation. Then it moves to like minor irritations, the demons, harassment. Then oppression, where it starts to get a little more real and physical. To vexation, which is very physical. Number 5 is called obsession, and that now moves from physical to mental. As the name implies, you think of obsession. At this stage, the afflicted person has a hard time functioning. They're constantly preoccupied with demonic, blasphemous, horrible thoughts. At times, the demonic activity just overshadows everything they're doing. They are given thoughts of suicide. Sleep becomes nearly impossible. Now, ironically, that's the only one that was kept by modern medical science. We still talk about obsession, and that's where it comes from, the original statements on exorcism.
That's
now,
interesting.
All those stages can be addressed by a competent deliverance minister, any priest, deacon, or qualified lay people. The last stage, however, is reserved just for official exorcists, not even just a normal priest. So any bishop or a appointed exorcist, and that is possession. Contrary to popular belief, possession is not demons entering your body and taking over your soul. A person's free will is never removed. It's only compromised in the sense that the person is so physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually broken down that the demons are able to kind of seize occasional control over the person and their actions. Telltale signs of possession, and Father Gary Thomas talks about this a lot. He says superhuman strength, speaking in languages the person would not be able to know, an inordinate aversion, a hatred of holy objects, and a sensing of where they are even if they're hidden, knowledge of events or facts they could not possibly know, and changes in facial features. Possession, like I said, can only be dealt with by an exorcist appointed by the bishop or a bishop. There is one final degree, which is not really a degree per se, because it's no longer a struggle. Excuse me. That number 7 we call integration. That refers to a person who is actually not struggling with the demonic anymore, but has given themselves over entirely to demons as a vessel to reside within and work through. I recommend the books Glimpses of the Devil again, and Dr. Gallagher's work, which I can't remember right now, where they describe some of their patients who have reached that level. But that's basically the 7 degrees, I guess 8 if you wanted to count temptation as sort of a primary degree of the ways in which these things can interact with us.
So, have you seen the movie The Conjuring?
I have, yes.
Yeah. So that's based off of, loosely based off of
the Warrens.
The Warrens,
right.
These Catholic lay people who are exorcists, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they, as lay people, attempt an exorcism.
Yeah.
It's a bad idea.
Yeah.
Very bad.
I was going to ask that, like, why is it just a priest or someone who, and not a lay person who...
Well, they've been anointed.
I will say, all I'll say is my dad had a friend who was a deacon, Al Masterson, and he claimed to be an exorcist too. Now, he was ordained in the early 70s, sort of when a lot of these stories were going on. So I don't know if the church was just so unprepared or unorganized at that time that maybe people were allowed to be, quote, exorcists, who today, even today, we might call yourself an exorcist, but it really means you can do deliverance, which is not the same thing.
Yeah. That's dealing with the lower 5.
Yeah.
On the list.
But I remember talking to you about it, and you were more talking about you were just opening up things that you are incapable of handling. Is that what you were trying to say, or?
Oh, you mean for a non-exorcist to try a full exorcism? Yeah, we could talk about this some other time in more detail, but the basic gist is when you do it yourself, your only authority is your own baptism. But when a priest does it, he does it with the whole authority of his holy orders, with the whole church's intercessory prayer and everything behind him.
And especially too when they go and get the permission from the bishop to act sort of on his behalf to exorcise somebody, then it's the full ordination of the bishop.
Yeah.
So, in other words, don't try this at home, people. Like, don't.
No, I mean, there's like the general prayers that Chris and I probably pray over our families all the time as the husbands and the fathers in our families, you know, where there's a certain level of dominion that we have over our house, but we know that that's limited, you know. Yeah. There's a very solid wall that we would hit if something like a really horrible vexation were to occur or something.
What'll happen sometimes, a lot of times, is in a charismatic prayer group or something, someone will have an issue, they'll pray over it for deliverance, and it'll be obvious that that's not enough. At that point is when a person really needs to go. So, yeah. So, well, why don't we wrap that up? Because I think we've kind of covered this one. And we will see you guys next time. Mm-hmm. And we just hope to see you soon. Keep watching, and God bless.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Hey, we're the Dirty Habits Catholic Podcast, and if you enjoyed that video, then please make sure you like, you subscribe, you smash that notification button, and come back and check out some more videos by me, Brother Justin, and Brother Chris.